son-in-law told me I didn't need to come up for Thanksgiving anymore. He said it gentle, the way you talk to a dog that bites. The cabin's really more the kids' place now, Estelle. Might be easier on everybody if you sat this one out. After I buried my husband and finished that cabin myself, board by board, with the money I earned standing on my feet for 31 years, so I signed it over to a pair of strangers the Monday before Thanksgiving. And when my daughter and her family pulled up that gravel drive with a frozen turkey rattling around in the trunk, there was already a truck parked under the big oak that didn't belong to any of us. The phone call came on a Sunday, 5:52 in the evening. I remember because I had a cake in the oven, a caramel cake, and I'd set the timer on the stove, and I kept one eye on it while my daughter talked. Caramel was Calvin's favorite. I still make it sometimes, even though there's nobody left in the house to eat it but me. I freeze the slices and pull one out when I'm missing him bad, and I let it thaw on a saucer, and I eat it slow, and for about 10 minutes it's like he's in the next room. I had the phone propped on my shoulder, flour on both hands. My daughter's voice came through small and rehearsed. "Hey, Mama, so listen, don't take this the wrong way, but Trevor and I were talking, and we just think this year, with his folks coming in from Tucson and the boys wanting to bring their girlfriends, it's going to be real tight up there. You know how that cabin is, there's just not the room. We'll do something with you after, okay? Maybe a nice dinner in town, just us. You understand. Love you, Mama." She didn't wait for me to answer. There was that little beep and then the lady's voice asking if I wanted to save the message or erase it. I took the cake out 3 minutes early because I forgot to listen for the timer, and it sank a little in the middle. I left it on the rack, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I didn't get up again until it was full dark and the street light came on outside the window. My name is Estelle Whitfield. I'm 69 years old. I cut hair for a living for 31 years, own my own shop on Gallatin Pike in Nashville, a little place called Stella's with a striped awning Calvin put up himself the spring we opened. I did wash-in sets for women who came every single Friday for 20 years, until they passed on or moved to be near their kids. I knew which ones were widowed and which ones were lonely, and which ones just liked somebody to touch their hair, gentle for an hour. I stood on a tile floor in good shoes that still weren't good enough, and at night Calvin would rub my feet without me even asking, and that man never once complained about it in 43 years of marriage. He died 4 years ago, his heart. It wasn't a long sickness, which everybody told me was a blessing, and maybe it was, but it didn't feel like one. One morning he was sitting in his chair doing the crossword in pen, the way he always did, too sure of himself to use pencil, and by that night he was gone. I keep that crossword. It's half done. I'll never finish it. Some things aren't yours to finish. We always talked about the mountains. Calvin grew up outside Gatlinburg, dirt poor, 6 kids in a house with no insulation, and you'd think a man would want to get away from a place like that, but he loved it. He used to drive us up there every fall to see the leaves, and he'd point out lots along the back roads and say, "Stella, one day we're going to have us a little place up here where the only sound is the creek." He drew it on the back of church bulletins, a porch facing the water, a stone chimney, a tin roof so we could hear the rain. He even picked out the kind of door he wanted. A red door, because he said a red door means welcome, means come on in, means you're home. We never had the money while he was alive, raising 2 kids on a hairdresser's wages and his pay from the gas company. There wasn't anything left over to be buying mountain land. But Calvin had a life insurance policy he paid into faithful for 30 years, and when he passed it came to a number I'd never seen in one place in my life. And I sold the salon. A young girl bought it, sweet thing, kept the name and everything. Between the two, I had enough. So I built the cabin, not for me, for him, because I'd be damned if that man was going to dream about something his whole life and die 6 months short of it. I bought 4 acres near Townsend, on the quiet side of the mountains, with a creek running right through the back of it, just like he wanted. The land was $61,000, and I paid cash and signed the deed with my hand shaking. Estelle Whitfield, sole owner. And I drove home and sat in the driveway and cried until a neighbor knocked on my window to ask was I all right. I hired a contractor named Hank, a big quiet man with a grey beard who'd built half the cabins in that county. I told him what Calvin wanted, and I showed him the drawings off the church bulletins, and that man did not laugh at me, did not talk down to me, just nodded and said, "We can do that." He framed it up over the summer, the first time I saw it standing, just the bones of it, the deck out over the creek and the posts going up. I drove Calvin up there. I took his picture. The last good one I had of him, from a church picnic, framed, riding in the passenger seat in the seat belt like he was a real person. I propped him on the deck where the railing would go, and I took a photograph of his photograph standing on that fresh-cut lumber with the creek behind him. And I know how that sounds, I do, but it's the closest I could get to having him see it. That picture sits on the mantel up there to this day, or it did. I'll get to that. I picked everything else myself. The pine floors, the stone for the chimney, hauled up from a quarry in Sevierville, the quilts, the big farm table that could seat 12 because Calvin always wanted a table where nobody had to eat off a TV tray, and I painted the front door red with my own 2 hands, 2 coats on my knees on the porch. And when it dried, I stood back and looked at it and said out loud, "There, you're home now." It took the better part of a year. I drove up every couple of weeks, 4 hours round trip, and brought Hank's crew biscuits and thermoses of coffee. I swept sawdust off a porch that didn't even have railings yet. The day they hung that red door, I tipped every man on the crew $100 cash, and Hank tried to give his back, and I wouldn't let him. The first fall it was done, I had everybody up. My daughter and her husband Trevor, and their 2 boys. My son Wesley, who lives out in Albuquerque and works himself half to death, flew in for it. My sister Ruth, who's got a bad hip and a worse attitude, and I love her more than anybody. I filled that refrigerator. I bought board games and bug spray and a canoe. I sewed each of the grandkids a flannel shirt and left it folded on their bunk with a little card. And that first Thanksgiving was everything Calvin would have wanted. We ate at the big table, all of us, and there was no kids' table because I'd built it so there wouldn't have to be one. Wesley played his guitar by the fire. Ruth and I sat out on the porch under quilts with the creek going and talked about our mama, about the year the well froze, about Daddy singing in the field. The boys caught a fish and named it and put it back. I set Calvin's photo at the head of the table, and nobody moved it, and nobody said a word about it, because some things don't need explaining. Love that's real just sits there like a stone in the creek and lets the water go around it. The second year is when it turned, slow, the way a season turns where you can't point to the day it got cold. Only that one morning you wake up and it just is. Trevor started in with ideas. The cabin needed a hot tub. The cabin needed faster internet so he could work up there. The cabin needed a gravel pad poured for his boat. He'd say these things at my own table, in my own house that I built for my own dead husband, like he was reading off a punch list. And my daughter, who I carried for 9 months and raised by myself half the time while Calvin worked nights, my daughter just nodded along with everything that man said, like she didn't have a thought left in her own head. She stopped helping me in the kitchen, stopped sitting with me in the mornings. She and Trevor would load the boys in the truck and go into Pigeon Forge for the day and leave me standing in the doorway with a pitcher of tea nobody asked for. Then at Christmas at my house in Nashville, she got me alone in the kitchen while everybody else watched the game. "Mama, we've been thinking, since we're really the ones up there the most, it'd just make things so much simpler if the cabin was in our name. For taxes and all. You wouldn't have to worry about the property tax or the insurance or any of it. Trevor would handle everything." I looked at my girl. My firstborn, I held her in the hospital and she had a full head of black hair and a set of lungs on her, and the nurse said, "This one's gonna tell you exactly what she thinks her whole life," and the nurse was right. Except somewhere along the way she stopped thinking it herself and started borrowing it from a man. "It's in my name," I said. "That's where it'll stay." She smiled at me, not a real smile. The kind a bank teller gives you when they're telling you no. "Okay, Mama, just an idea." But it wasn't just an idea. Ideas don't show up 3 weeks later on letterhead. The envelope came to my house in January, a law office in Knoxville, Pruitt and Associates, a man named Spencer Pruitt. It was a real polite letter, real professional, all about how, given the family's primary use and maintenance of the property, it would be appropriate to execute a voluntary transfer of ownership, and there was a quitclaim deed enclosed, already filled out, with my name typed at the bottom and a line for me to sign. I read it 3 times, standing at the mailbox in my house coat with the cold coming up through my slippers. Then I went inside and I put it in the drawer of my nightstand, the one where I keep Calvin's reading glasses and both our wedding bands, and I did not sign it, and I did not call my daughter, and I did not call that lawyer. I sat in Calvin's chair by the window, and I want to tell you I was angry, but anger would have been easier. What I felt was further down than anger. It was the feeling of being read wrong by somebody who should have known you by heart. They thought I'd sign it. That's what got me. They had typed up a legal document to take my home, and they were so sure I'd put my name on it, because I was old and soft and a mother and mother's sign. Mothers give and give and give until there's nothing left, and then they hush about it. That's what they thought I was for. The next months were a long, slow lesson in becoming invisible. My daughter called less, and when she did it, was Trevor's opinions coming out of her mouth. We had the deck restained. Trevor's parents are coming up for Easter, telling me, not asking, about my house. In March, they changed the lock. Trevor told me the old keypad was acting up, gave me a new code on a slip of paper. But when I drove up in April with my car full of flower bulbs to put in along the walk, the code didn't work. I stood on that porch I designed, looking through the window at the stone chimney I picked stone by stone, at Calvin's picture on the mantel, holding a slip of paper with numbers on it that opened nothing. I called my daughter from the porch. "Oh, Trevor must have reset it. I'll text you the new one." She never texted me the new one. I sat in my car in my own driveway and looked at that red door, the door I painted on my knees, the door that was supposed to mean welcome, and I thought about Calvin saying one day, "We'll have a place where nobody can put us out," and here I was put out by my own child. I drove the 4 hours home in the dark with the windows cracked because the cold air kept me from crying so hard I'd run off the road. And here's where I did something different than maybe most folks would have, and I want you to hear it, because I'd done enough waiting in my life. I'd waited my whole life. I waited for raises that came small. I waited for my children to call. I was done waiting. The next morning, I called a locksmith in Townsend, and I drove back up, and I had him drill out that keypad and put on a deadbolt, a real one, with a key, my key. The deed was in my name. It was my legal right, and he confirmed it before he'd do the work. I changed the lock back on my own house, and then I went to a lawyer of my own, a woman named Yvonne Castellano, who'd handled Calvin's estate, sharp as a tack and didn't suffer fools, and I laid the whole thing out on her desk. The voicemail. The letter from Pruitt. The quitclaim deed I never signed. She read it over her glasses and set it down and said, "Estelle, this is worth exactly nothing. You never signed a thing. That cabin is yours, free and clear, and they don't have a leg to stand on." "What can they do to me?" I asked her. "Nothing," she said. "Not one thing." "Then I want you to do something for me," I said. "I want a letter sent to my daughter and her husband on your letterhead. that says in plain English the property belongs to me. The locks have been changed at the owner's direction, and any further attempt to claim, encumber, or occupy the property without my permission will be treated as trespass. And I wanted to say it polite, the way they said it polite to me. She almost smiled. I can do that. That letter went out on a Friday. I want you to understand I still hadn't decided anything yet. I gave my daughter one more chance, and I gave it to her clean. I called her, and I didn't fight, and I didn't cry. I just said, "Baby, I'd like to come up to the cabin over Memorial Day. Bring some of that caramel cake the boys like. Just spend a few days at my place." There was a pause, and then that voice, the one that used to call me Mama and now talked to me like I was a problem on a list. "Mama, Trevor's folks have it that whole month. It's just not a good time. Maybe later in the summer." "Maybe later in the summer," I repeated. "Yeah, we'll figure it out." And she hung up first. She always hung up first. That was the 3rd of May. On the 5th of May, I listed the cabin for sale. I priced it at $290,000. The market up there was hot, cabins moving in days, folks from the cities wanting their piece of the mountains. Within a week I had 4 offers. I took the best one, $311,000, from a couple who'd just retired out of Cincinnati, a man and his wife who teared up walking through it, who told me they had 9 grandbabies and they wanted a place big enough for all of them at once. The wife ran her hand along that big farm table and said, "Oh, you could fit everybody at this," and I had to step out on the porch for a minute. We closed on a Wednesday, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the very same Thanksgiving my daughter had told me there wasn't room for me. I didn't tell them a thing. I signed the papers in Yvonne's office and she slid the check across the desk, and I folded it once and put it in my purse, right next to Calvin's picture, the one of his picture standing on the fresh lumber over the creek, grinning at something I'd said that neither of us would ever remember now. "You holding up?" Yvonne asked me. "Better than I have in years," I said, and it was the truth. My daughter called me on Thanksgiving morning. Her voice was up high and shaking. I could hear Trevor in the background, sharp and ugly. "Mama, what is going on at the cabin? There's people here. There's a moving truck. Some man says he owns it. Mama, what did you do?" I let it sit a second, just a second. Then I said it plain. "I sold it." You what? You sold it? My cabin?" "That's my cabin, Mama. The boys grew up." "It was never your cabin," I said. "It was mine. The one I built with your daddy's insurance and my own 2 hands. The one with his picture on the mantel and his name on the deed of nothing, because the deed had my name on it, only mine, the whole entire time. You told me there wasn't room for me. You changed the locks on me. You sent a lawyer to my house to take my home. So I made room, baby. I made room for it to belong to somebody who'll be glad I built it." "Mama, you can't just—" "I already did, and I need you to hear me clear, because I'm only going to say it the once. I am 69 years old. I stood on my feet for 31 years so you could have shoes that fit. I sat up nights with your daddy when he was sick so you wouldn't have to see it. I built that whole cabin by myself to give this family a place to remember a good man, and you changed the locks. So don't you dare get on this phone and act confused about why the door's shut." She was crying. I'd be lying if I said it didn't cut me. There is no sound in this world like your own child crying, no matter how old they get, no matter what they've done. But I held the line. "I love you," I said. "I will always love you. But I am not going to be erased by the people I gave my whole life to. Not anymore." And I hung up. And for once it was me that hung up first. The calls came after that, day and night. My daughter, then Trevor, his voice all threats and lawyers. Then even his mother, a woman I'd been nothing but kind to, called to tell me I'd ruined the I've turned it over 100 times since, stirring caramel on a low burner, and what I keep landing on is simple. Nothing in my story happened by accident. Every door that's shut, shut because of a choice somebody made, including me. Trevor didn't take my cabin in one grab. He took it the way water takes a riverbank, a little at a time, one suggestion at a time, and the only reason it worked as long as it did was that I let it. I told myself staying quiet was kindness. It wasn't. It was fear, wearing kindness like a coat. The day I called that locksmith and that lawyer was the day I stopped paying for other people's comfort with my own erasure. If there's anything I'd want a younger woman to carry out of this, is that being good and being a doormat are not the same thing, no matter how often the world tries to braid them together. I gave my daughter 40 years of yes. The one time I gave her a clean, quiet no, she heard it as cruelty because she'd never been taught my yes had a bottom to it. That's on me as much as her. Real decency isn't endless giving. Real decency is being honest about what's fair, even when honesty costs you the holiday, even when your own child cries on the phone and you have to hold the line anyway. But it took more than a good heart to get free. It took clear eyes. For 2 years, I let myself be confused on purpose because confusion was easier than seeing my own girl let a man talk over me at my own table. The morning I drove 4 hours home in the dark, I stopped pretending I didn't understand what was happening. I went and read the deed with my own name on it. I asked Yvonne the plain question, what can they do to me? And I let the plain answer, nothing, become a plan instead of just a comfort. Knowing the truth wasn't enough. I had to be willing to act on it. And that's the last piece, the hard one. Knowing what's right and even knowing what's true won't move a single thing if you can't make yourself do the uncomfortable part. Listing that cabin while my hands shook. Saying the words I sold it into a phone with my daughter crying on the other end. Closing the laptop on an email asking me for $18,000 instead of an apology. None of that was easy. Easy would have been signing the quitclaim and keeping the peace and slowly disappearing. I chose the harder thing, and the harder thing gave me back to myself. Calvin used to say you don't rush the broth, you stir slow and you wait. He meant patience. But I learned late that patience isn't the same as permission. You can wait on a thing without letting it run you over. So if you take one thing from an old woman who finally stood up at 69, let it be this. Be kind, but mean your no. See clearly, even when the truth is your own child. And when the moment comes to act on it, don't flinch. The door you build for yourself is the only one that stays open.